At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. The unnamed ghost ship had been found drifting through the void among the stars, carrying promises of ancient technology, lost treasures, and long-buried secrets that could prove immensely valuable to every species in the Galactic Council. The problem, however, was that a species not belonging to the Council had infiltrated the treasure hunt. Now Zeol was struggling to convince the others that finding this human was far more important than quarreling over how to divide the loot.
"The human is here somewhere,"
Zeol insisted, his voice climbing higher than its natural pitch as frustration mounted. The sound that emerged was almost comical, like a piccolo trying to command an orchestra, and he noticed several of his companions struggling to suppress their amusement. His body, no larger than a human head, trembled with the effort of projecting authority. His green skin, large black eyes, and tiny limbs, little more than vestigial nubs, hung uselessly at his sides. That weakness would have doomed him long ago, were it not for his exoskeleton. The mechanical frame responded instantly to the neural implant at the base of his skull, its joints whirring as he gestured emphatically with metallic arms that granted him the reach and presence his natural form lacked. Without it, he'd be nothing more than a talking head among these giants. With it, he stood as tall as most of them, an equal, at least in theory.
"Listen to me,"
Zeol continued, the exoskeleton's hands clenching into fists.
"We can argue about salvage rights all we want, but none of it will matter if that Deathworld picks us off one by one. Humans are banned from the Galactic Council for a reason. They're predators, killers by nature. Every moment we waste arguing is another moment it has to hunt us."
Ilara shifted, her transparent form rippling like disturbed water. The bipedal creature looked as if she were made entirely of soft jelly, her internal organs visible as darker shadows floating within her translucent flesh. When she spoke, her agreement came as a relief to Zeol. "The small one speaks truth," she said, her voice emanating from somewhere within her gelatinous mass. "Deathworlders are a risk to every one of us. They come from worlds so hostile that evolution itself had to make them into weapons just to survive. This human could kill us all without breaking one of its sweat glands." Her agreement proved almost infectious. Around the docking bay, the other 5 members of their salvage team began expressing their consent in their various alien ways. Vadik, the black-scaled reptilian, bobbed his elongated head in a serpentine nod. Kayan, whose delicate features and pointed ears gave her an almost ethereal appearance, shifted the chromatophores in her skin from skeptical amber to agreeable blue. Goner, the plant-like being whose body was a tangle of thick vines and flowering appendages, rustled his foliage in what his species considered affirmation. Even Imara, the black-furred biped, expressed her agreement with a simple nod. It was then that the biggest individual among their diverse group spoke, his voice emanating from speakers built into his full-body armor. "I will lead the search efforts." Zira stood nearly 3 meters tall, his armor adding considerable bulk to what was already an imposing frame. No part of his actual body was visible, even his face was hidden behind a polarized visor that reflected the world around him like a mirror. "Among non-Deathworlders, the Krovar are the strongest," Zira continued, his armored hand thumping against his chestplate. "This armor has protected me through raids on ice worlds, and even a brief skirmish with Vanadian pirates. It will protect me against one human. Besides, we can continue searching for ancient treasures as we look for the intruder. Kill 2 birds with a single stone." He paused, his helmet tilting slightly. "Actually, there are no birds on my homeworld, but you get the point." Zeol found nothing unusual about the Krovar using bird analogies and human expressions. His mind was too occupied weighing the benefits of Zira's offer. Leading the search himself would put him at terrible risk. His exoskeleton gave him mobility and manipulation, but it offered little in terms of protection. If Zira wanted to take point, to make himself the primary target for a Deathworlder's attention, who was Zeol to argue? It increased his own chances of returning home with something valuable after all. The arithmetic of survival was simple and cruel. I agree, Zeol said, his mechanical hand gesturing toward Zira. You're the best equipped among us for this task. The others murmured their consent, and with that, their hunt for the human began. Zira led them through the corridors, his heavy boots the only sound as the group ventured deeper into the ghost ship. The passages were narrower than Zeol had expected, clearly designed for being smaller than the armored Krovar, who had to duck occasionally to avoid overhead pipes and conduits. The emergency lighting strips had long since failed, leaving them reliant on their helmet lamps and portable lights to push back the oppressive darkness. The walls bore strange markings, not quite writing, not quite art. They seemed to shift in the moving light, creating an unsettling illusion of movement that made Zeol's small organic eyes water. His exoskeleton sensors detected no immediate threats, but something about this ship felt wrong. They'd been searching for nearly an hour when they found the room. Beyond the threshold lay a chamber filled with what could only be described as an army of the dead. Robots, dozens of them, perhaps more than 100, standing in perfect formation like soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. Each stood roughly 2 meters tall, their chassis a dull gray metal that seemed old. "By the old ones," Irma whispered, her forearms unconsciously reaching for the various tools and weapons strapped to her belt. Her black fur stood on end, making her appear larger than her already considerable frame. "What are those things?" Zira's helmet swiveled as he surveyed the room, the lights mounted on his shoulders sweeping across the silent mechanical army. His covered eyes seemed to fix on Emira, studying her for a long moment before he spoke. "Someone needs to investigate," he said. "Check if they're truly deactivated. Look for control panels, anything that might tell us what these things were for. Emira, you're the most agile among us. These rows are narrow. I couldn't fit through them in this armor, and the others would have difficulty maneuvering. You could weave between them easily." Emira's ears became soft, her four hands clenching and unclenching. That's a lot of robots, Zira. What if they activate? What if this is a trap?" "Then we need to know that before we go deeper into the ship," Zira replied reasonably. "Unless someone has a better idea. Should we vote?" The group exchanged glances. Zeol's exoskeleton straightened as he raised one mechanical hand. "I support Zira's suggestion. Emira is our best choice for this reconnaissance. We'll all be watching, ready to help if anything goes wrong." One by one, the others raised their appendages in agreement. Vadic's scaled hand, Ilara's gelatinous approximation of an arm, Kayan's delicate fingers, Gunnar's vine-like tentacles, all voting in favor. Emira looked around at all of them, her forearms dropping at her sides in resignation, perhaps feeling the weight of peer pressure, perhaps simply accepting the logic of the situation. She nodded. "Fine, but if these things so much as twitch, I'm running." She moved forward cautiously, her natural grace evident despite her size. Her feet made almost no sound on the metal floor, an obvious contrast to Zira's heavy footfalls. She slipped between the first rows of robots, her fur brushing against their metal bodies as she squeezed through the narrow space. "They're cold," she reported, her voice tight with tension. "No power signatures that I can detect. Some of them are damaged. Looks like energy weapon scoring. There was a battle here long ago." She moved deeper into the formation, her helmet light playing across dead optical sensors and frozen joints. Zeol found himself holding his breath, or rather his species' equivalent of breath-holding, which involved closing the spiracles along his true body's sides. Emira had reached the center of the formation when it happened. A single red light flickered to life in the chest of the robot nearest to her, then another and another. Like a wave of crimson stars, the activation light spread through the formation. Optical sensors activated at once. All heads swiveled, and 100 pairs of mechanical hands reached out in perfect synchronization. Emira's scream was primal, the sound of prey recognizing its doom. The robots moved with inhuman speed, their hands closing around her arms, her legs, her torso. She thrashed wildly, her considerable strength meaningless against the mechanical tide that engulfed her. "Run!" Zira's voice boomed through his speakers, and the group needed no further encouragement. They fled in absolute terror, their various forms of locomotion carrying them back through the corridors at maximum speed. Zeo's exoskeleton pumped its legs in a rhythm his organic body could have never achieved. Behind them, They could hear Emira's continued screams, growing fainter with distance but never stopping, never ending. They didn't stop running until they'd put 3 bulkheads and half the ship between themselves and that nightmare room. Gasping, trembling, they huddled in what appeared to be an old storage bay, their lights creating a small island of illumination in the darkness. "This is your fault." Vadic's voice was a harsh hiss, his scales flushed dark with anger and fear. His tail lashed back and forth, striking the floor as he spoke. "Both of you," he pointed at Zira and then at Zeal. "Your plan got Emira killed. There are just 6 of us now." "We all voted," Zero protested, his exoskeleton raising its hands defensively. "Everyone agreed it was the best course of action." "He's right," Zira added, his armored form somehow managing to convey reasonableness despite the lack of visible body language. "We made a group decision based on the information available. No one could have predicted these robots would activate." The others shifted uncomfortably. Zeol noticed them exchanging glances, saw the subtle nods of agreement. Yes, they had all voted. The responsibility was shared, even if the suggestion had come from Zira. It was easier to accept when the blame was distributed among them all. They gave themselves an hour to recover, though rest was impossible with the memory of Emira's screams still echoing in their minds. When they finally resumed their search, the group moved with notably more caution. Every doorway was approached as a potential trap, every shadow suspected of harboring either ancient dangers or their human quarry. Zira continued to lead, his armor's heavy footfalls now oddly comforting in their regularity. The sound meant their strongest member was still with them, still protecting them. They explored methodically, marking their path with chemical markers that glowed faintly in the darkness, breadcrumbs to lead them back to the docking bay if needed. The bridge, when they finally found it, was both a disappointment and a mystery. The command center was smaller than any of them had expected, clearly designed for a crew of no more than a dozen. Control stations formed a rough semicircle facing a main viewing screen that had long since gone dark. Chairs, actual chairs with backs and armrests suggesting a bipedal crew, sat empty before dead consoles. The air here felt different, heavier somehow. And besides, one screen still lived. It was small, no larger than Zeo's exoskeleton's torso, set into what appeared to be the captain's station. Amber text scrolled across it in an endless loop, the characters alien but somehow familiar. "Vadic?" Zira called, gesturing to the reptilian. "You're our linguistic expert. What can you make of this?" Vadic slithered forward, his long neck extending to bring his head close to the screen. His forked tongue flicked out repeatedly, though what information he could gather from tasting the air near ancient technology, Zeol couldn't guess. "The script uses 26 individual characters," Vadic announced after several minutes of study. "They repeat in pattern, suggesting a phonetic alphabet rather than ideographic system. Whoever built this ship, these ancients, they used a fairly simple script." "Look there," Zira said suddenly, pointing with one armored finger at a symbol beside the text. "That's a hand, a 5-fingered hand." They all leaned in to look. He was right. The symbol clearly showed a palm with 5 digits extended, rendered in the same amber as the text. "Perhaps it's an instruction," Zira suggested. "Maybe we need to touch it to reactivate the ship's power." The hand symbol could be indicating a palm activation system. "That's insane," Kayan protested, her skin flushing through several colors of disagreement. "You're drawing massive conclusions from a single symbol. It could mean anything. Stop, danger, authorized personnel only." "It could," Zira agreed, "but we've been on this ship for hours now and found nothing but death and darkness. No treasure, no technology we can salvage, no sign of the human. If we can restore power, we might be able to access the ship's logs, find out what happened here, maybe even locate our unwanted visitor through internal sensors. Even if you're right," Ilara's gelatinous form quivered with anxiety, "who would do it? That screen could be electrified or contaminated or linked to another trap like those robots." Zira's helmet turned toward Vadic. "You're the only one here with 5 fingers who isn't wearing armor that would take 20 minutes to remove. If it is palm activated, you're our best chance." "Absolutely not." Vadic's tail coiled beneath him, a defensive posture. "I won't be your test subject." "Then we vote," Zira said simply. "All in favor of Vadic attempting to activate the system?" Zeol raised his mechanical hand immediately. He'd learned from the first incident, hesitation only prolonged the inevitable and made you look weak. Better to be decisive, to be part of the group making decisions rather than having decisions made for you. The others followed suit, some more reluctantly than others. Gunner's vines twisted uncertainly before rising. Kayan's color shifted through a spectrum of uncertainty before her hand joined the others. Even Ilara, trembling like gelatin in an earthquake, raised her approximation of a hand. Vatic looked around at them all, his vertical pupils dilating with what Zeol recognized as rage. "You can't be serious. You're all going to vote to potentially sacrifice me based on a guess?" "It's the most logical course of action," Zira said, his tone maddeningly reasonable, "unless you have a better idea. We could just leave, return to our ships, report the danger, let the Council send a proper military expedition." "And return empty-handed?" Zeol found himself speaking before he'd consciously decided to. "After all we've risked to get here, the Council won't send another expedition. They'll quarantine this ship, declare it too dangerous. This is our only chance." The others murmured agreement. Vatic's scales darkened further, but faced with unanimous opposition, he finally slithered forward. "If I die," he hissed, "I'm haunting every single one of you." He extended his hand toward the screen, his scales rippling with tension. The appendage trembled as it moved closer to the amber symbol. Around him, the group held their collective breath, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Vatic's palm made contact. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed red, and a sound like grinding metal filled the bridge. Mechanical tentacles, each as thick as Zeo's exoskeleton's arm, burst from hidden panels in the console. They moved with impossible speed, wrapping around Vatic before he could even begin to pull away. The reptilian's scream was different from Ymira's, higher, more piercing, with an undertone that made Zeol's primitive brain insist he should be running. The tentacles constricted, lifting Vatic off the ground, his tail thrashing wildly as he fought against their grip. They ran again. There was no discussion, no attempt at rescue. The moment those tentacles appeared, survival instinct overrode everything else. They fled through the corridors, Zira's heavy footfalls thundering behind them, Goner's vines leaving trails of sap on the walls in his haste, Ilara's gelatinous form stretching and compressing as she moved in a way that defied normal physics. They stopped only when they reached another section of the ship entirely, collapsing in what appeared to be a defunct medical bay. Ancient equipment lined the walls, their purposes mysterious and vaguely threatening in the dancing light of their lamps. "This is madness!" Ilara's entire body was vibrating with fear or anger or both. "You're trying to eliminate the competition, both of you!" She gestured wildly at Zeol and Zira. "First Ymira, now Vatic. Who's next?" "We all voted," Zira said. "Every single time, we all voted. You can't blame us for democratic decisions." "Democratic?" Kayan's laugh was bitter, her skin recycling through angry reds and oranges. "You manipulate us in these votes, present options that seem reasonable until they turn into death traps." "No one is forcing anyone to do anything," Zeol insisted, his exoskeleton's hands spreading wide. "We're all trying to survive and complete this mission. The dangers are unexpected, but the decisions are collective." Goner rustled his foliage in what might have been agreement or simply exhaustion. "They're right about the voting. We all raised our appendages. We all agreed." The argument continued in circles, but Zeol noticed that the fundamental dynamic hadn't changed. Despite their losses, despite their fear, they still followed when Zira led them back into the corridors. They were treasure hunters, after all. The promise of ancient technology, of wealth beyond imagination, still pulled them forward, even if that pull was leading them to their doom. The hydroponics bay, when they found it, seemed like a miracle after hours of death and darkness. They'd been searching through what seemed to be the ship's residential section. Small quarters with beds sized for beings roughly human height, common areas with tables and chairs that suggested a social species, even what might have been recreational facilities, though the equipment's purpose was lost to time. Then Ilira had noticed it, a door different from the others, sealed but with a faint light visible through a small window. "There's something in there," she said, her transparent form pressed against the door. "Something still active." They approached cautiously, memories of robots and tentacles fresh in their minds. Zira manipulated the manual door release, his armored hands surprisingly delicate as he worked the mechanism. The door opened, and they found themselves staring at the impossible. Green. Living, growing, green. The hydroponics bay stretched before them, row upon row of growing beds filled with plants that should have died centuries ago. Automated systems worked quietly, providing water, nutrients, and artificial sunlight to the old garden. "By the sacred void," Zeol said, his exoskeleton stepping forward. "These could be worth a fortune. Extinct plants from a dead civilization kept alive by automated systems? The scientific value alone is incalculable, never mind what pharmaceutical companies might pay for unknown organic compounds." Zira laughed, the sound strange coming from his armor speakers. "Yes, I'm sure the universe is desperate for ancient lettuce." He paused, his helmet tilting. "I mean, that's something I studied in xenobiology a long time ago. Some plants have similar characteristics across species, convergent evolution and all that." Goner had moved to the doorway, his vine-like appendages stretched toward the garden with obvious longing. As most plant-like among them, he had a different relationship with flora than the others. His photosynthetic skin seemed to brighten in the artificial light. "What should we do?" Kayan asked. "We can't just leave this, but after what happened with the robots and the bridge." "We need someone to investigate," Zira said, his helmet turning towards Goner. "Someone who understands plants, who can evaluate what we're looking at. Goner, you're more plant than animal. You could communicate with them perhaps, or at least understand if they're dangerous. The rest of us will maintain a perimeter. Watch for the human." "No." Goner's response was immediate, his vines retracting defensively. "I've seen what happens to those who volunteer for your investigations." "We'll vote then," Zira said, already raising his armored hand. Zeol raised his mechanical hand as well, before he could see the tide turning. After 2 incidents, the others were becoming wary. Ilara hesitated, her form rippling with indecision. Kayan's colors shifted through a spectrum of uncertainty. "Wait," Zeol said, his mind racing. "Goner, what if you received a larger share? You investigate the hydroponics bay, and you get 80% of whatever botanical samples we recover. Sounds fair to me." Goner's foliage rustled, a sign of interest despite his fear. 80%? 80%, Zeol confirmed. "The rest of us will split the remaining 20. The plant being stood still for a long moment, photosynthetic skin frozen in thought. Finally, his vines uncurled. "Fine, but I'm not going far from the door." He moved into the hydroponics bay, taking cautious steps, his vine-like appendages reaching out to brush against the various plants. His whole body seemed to relax in the artificial sunlight, leaves that formed part of his structure spreading to absorb the light. "They're healthy," he reported, wonder in his voice. "The automated systems have been running for centuries, maybe longer. Simple, but effective." He moved deeper among the growing beds, his curiosity overcoming his caution. Then they heard it, footsteps in the corridor behind them. Heavy, but unmistakably bipedal. "The human!" Kayan said, her skin flashing through the entire visible spectrum in panic. "It's found us!" "Defensive positions!" Zira commanded, turning from the doorway to face the corridor. But as they turned to prepare for their Deathworlder encounter, they heard the hydroponics bay door slam shut with definitive mechanical force. Through the small window, they could see Goner pounding on the door with his vine appendages, his usual green form flushing brown with terror. Inside the bay, the automated systems had come alive in a different way. Mechanical arms designed for pruning and harvesting descended from the ceiling. They moved toward Goner all at once. "The footsteps!" Ilara quivered. "The human is coming!" They ran again, abandoning Goner to his fate among the very plants he'd been promised. The footsteps behind them seemed to echo through the corridors, always just far enough away to be heard but never close enough to see. They ran through sections of the ship they hadn't explored, past doors they didn't have time to investigate. Their only thought, escape. When they finally stopped, gasping and trembling in what appeared to be an observation lounge with long-dead viewports looking out into space, only 4 of them remained. "Half," Ilara said, her voice shaking as badly as her gelatinous form. "Half of us are gone. This is your doing." She pointed accusingly at Zeol and Zira. "You've been eliminating us one by one." "We all voted," Zeol protested weakly, but even he was beginning to see the pattern. Every suggestion had come from Zira. Every vote had been led by himself and the armored figure. "We were trying to complete the mission." "The mission is a failure," Kayan said, her colors dark and muted. "3 of us are dead, we found nothing of value, and we still haven't even seen this human, much less dealt with it." Zira stood silent, his armored form unreadable as always. The polarized visor reflected their frightened faces back at them, distorted and strange in the curved surface. "I'm done," Kayan announced, her skin settling on a deep, decisive purple. "This mission is cursed. We're leaving." "Agreed," Ilara's voice bubbled from within her translucent mass. "Whatever treasures this ship holds aren't worth our lives. We've lost 3 people, and you haven't even confronted the human yet." Zeol felt his exoskeleton's servos whir as he nodded slowly. The math had become undeniable. They'd started with 7, now they were 4. At this rate, none of them would survive to see any profit from this venture. His small organic brain, encased in its mechanical shell, processed the odds and found them unacceptable. "You're right," he admitted, the words feeling like defeat. "We should return to our ships. The Council needs to know about this vessel, but they should send a military expedition, not treasure hunters. We're not equipped for this." The 3 of them turned to look at Zira, waiting for his response. The armored figure had been unusually quiet since their latest escape, standing motionless near the sealed doorway like a monument to their failures. Then he laughed. It started as a chuckle, distorted through his armor speakers, but grew into full-bodied laughter that filled the observation lounge. The sound was wrong somehow, too genuine, too unfiltered to be coming through electronic speakers. As they watched in growing horror, Zira's armored hands moved to his helmet. "No," Ilara whispered, beginning to back away. "No, no, no!" The helmet came off with a soft hiss of releasing pressure seals, and the face underneath wasn't Krovar at all. It was human. The Deathworlder stood before them, his pink, pale skin gleaming with a light sheen of perspiration, dark hair matted from hours inside the helmet. His eyes, forward-facing predator's eyes, swept over them with an intelligence that made Zeol's primitive brain scream warnings. The human's mouth curved in what their species called a smile, but which looked to Zeol like a threat display, showing these omnivorous teeth that could tear both plant and flesh. "Hello," the human said, his actual voice warm and terrifyingly friendly as he pulled a projectile weapon from a concealed compartment in the armor. "It's been fun playing with you, but I'm afraid you're not going anywhere." The weapon was primitive by Galactic Council standards, a chemical-propelled projectile thrower rather than an energy weapon. But Zeol knew enough about humans to know it would kill them just as dead. The human held it casually, comfortably, like an extension of his arm. "How?" Kayan's chromatic display had locked on stark white, the color of absolute terror. You were Zira. How?" "The name's Gus, actually," the human said, still smiling that predator's smile. "Short for Augustus, but who has time for 3 syllables in the field? As for your Krovar friend, I took him down the moment his ship docked here. Big fella, strong, but slow. Krovar always depend too much on their strength, not enough on their brains. Easy target." "You've been with us the whole time," Zeol said, his mechanical voice hollow with realization. "Leading us, voting with us." "Leading you into traps," Gus corrected cheerfully. "Though I'll admit, you made it easier than I expected. So ready to vote each other into danger for the promise of treasure, I barely had to suggest anything. You practically competed to throw each other to the wolves." He paused. "That's a human expression. Wolves are predators from our world. Nasty things to their prey, but loyal to their pack, unlike you lot." They stood frozen, unable to run with the weapon trained on them, unable to fight against a Deathworlder who had already proven his superiority. Zeol's exoskeleton could have attempted to rush the human, but his organic brain knew the futility of it. Humans had reflexes honed by evolution on a death world, reaction times that put most council species to shame. "Why?" Zeol finally asked. "Why did you do this? Are you going to kill us like we planned to kill you?" Gus tilted his head, a gesture that looked almost curious. "Kill you? Now that's an interesting assumption. Tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you a story about why I did all this, and then we can discuss killings. Would you like to hear a story?" The 3 survivors exchanged glances. When a predator offers you a delay in your execution, you take it. They nodded eagerly, desperately, hoping that somehow the story might buy them time or mercy. "Excellent." Gus moved to one of the ancient chairs, sitting down but keeping his weapon trained on them. Gather round, children. Let Uncle Gus tell you about the ghost ship you so eagerly wanted to plunder. They moved closer, having little choice in the matter. Zio's exoskeleton lowered itself to the floor, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. This ship, Gus began, gesturing around them with his free hand, is called the Perseverance. She was launched from Earth, that's our Deathworld, by the way, about 300 years ago. Back then, humans had just figured out FTL travel. We were eager, excited, ready to meet other species among the stars. The Perseverance was one of our first deep exploration vessels. He paused, his expression growing more serious. What we found, of course, was the Galactic Council. And what the Council found was a species they couldn't accept. We came from a world where everything tries to kill you. The weather, the wildlife, the bacteria, even the plants in some cases. We evolved to be survivors, fighters, engineers of our own survival. To the Council, we were monsters. "You are monsters," Ilara whispered, then immediately quivered as the gun shifted slightly toward her. "Perhaps," Gus agreed mildly, "but we were monsters who wanted to be friends." The Perseverance was on a diplomatic mission when the Council declared humanity too dangerous for membership. The crew received orders to return home, but something went wrong with their FTL drive. They've been drifting ever since. The crew, long dead, only the automated systems keeping parts of the ship running. "So you came to recover it?" Kayan asked, her colors shifting through confused patterns. "Or destroy it," Gus confirmed. "Humanity has kept to itself since the Council's rejection, developing our own technology, our own little corner of space. But we monitor Council communications. When we learned treasure hunters had found the Perseverance, we couldn't allow human technology to fall into hostile hands. Even old, outdated tech could be reverse engineered, could give the Council advantages we can't allow." "But the robots," Zeol said, his mechanical mind processing the information. "The tentacles, the hydroponics bay, those were all human old technology?" "Every last trap," Gus confirmed, looking pleased with himself. "The robots respond to remote commands. I activated them with a signal from this armor. The bridge console, rigged to reject anything that doesn't have human DNA. The hydroponics bay, its automated systems are programmed to treat any large plant-like organism as overgrowth that needs pruning. I knew exactly what would happen each time." "You orchestrated everything," Zeol said, the full weight of realization crushing down on him. "Every suggestion, every vote." "Democracy in action," Gus said with a mock salute. "You all voted after all. I just provided the options. Amazing how easy it is to make people complicit in their own destruction when you frame it as a group decision." They had been puppets dancing on strings they couldn't even see. Zeol's exoskeleton trembled, whether from fear or rage he couldn't tell. They had walked into trap after trap, following the very predator they'd been hunting. "So, what now?" Ilara asked, her form so compressed with fear she looked almost solid. "You've had your fun, proved your point. Are you going to kill us, like we planned to kill you?" Gus stood up from the chair, the weapon still trained on them, but his posture relaxed. "Kill you? What would be the point of that? Dead treasure hunters tell no tales, and I want this tale told." He walked over to a wall panel, pressing a series of buttons with practiced ease. "You can go, all of you." "What?" Kayan's colors flashed through confusion. "You're letting us leave?" "With conditions," Gus said. "You take everyone with you. Yes, that includes your 3 dead companions." As if on cue, the door to the observation lounge opened. The robots from before entered, but this time their movements were careful, almost gentle. They carried 3 forms, Emira, Vatic, and Gunnar, unconscious but visibly breathing. "They're alive?" Zeol actually squeaked, a sound he didn't know it could make. "Sedated," Gus corrected. "The robots were programmed to subdue, not kill. Same with the tentacles. They just held Vatic until he passed out from fear, then injected a mild sedative. Gunnar got the gentlest treatment of all, just some sleeping gas mixed into the hydroponics bay atmosphere. They'll wake up with headaches and bruised egos, nothing more." The robots carefully placed the unconscious forms on the floor, then retreated back through the doorway. Zeol's exoskeleton scrambled over to them, checking their vital signs with sensors he rarely used. They were indeed alive, just deeply asleep. "Why?" Ilara asked, her voice small and confused. "We came here ready to kill you. We voted to hunt you down like an animal." "Because I'm trying to make a point," Gus said, finally lowering his weapon completely. "Humans aren't the monsters you think we are. We're dangerous, yes. We're predators, absolutely. But we're not mindless killers. We're capable of mercy, of restraint, of choosing not to kill, even when we have every reason and opportunity to do so." He walked back to the chair where he'd left Zira's helmet, picking it up and turning it over in his hands. "The Council banned us because they feared what we might do, not because of what we actually did. You came here ready to kill on sight, based on nothing but fear and prejudice. I could have killed you all the moment you docked. I had the ship, the knowledge, the home territory. Instead, I gave you a lesson." "A lesson?" Zio repeated, his mind reeling. This was all education? "The best kind," Gus said with that predator's grin. "The kind you survive to remember." He moved to another wall panel, and the lights in the observation lounge suddenly blazed to full power. For the first time, they could see the room clearly, see the human clearly. He looked younger than Zeol had expected, with laugh lines around his eyes and calloused hands that spoke of real work, not just button pushing. "You have 15 minutes to get your unconscious friends back to your ships," Gus announced. "After that, the Perseverance is going to experience a catastrophic reactor failure. Nothing you can salvage, I'm afraid. Can't have Council techs poking through human engineering, even centuries-old engineering." They didn't need to be told twice. Zeol's exoskeleton lifted Emira's considerable bulk, surprised at how light she felt with proper mechanical leverage. Ilara enveloped Vatic in her gelatinous form, distributing his weight throughout her mass. Kayan, despite her delicate appearance, managed to support Goner's plant-like form with surprising strength. As they struggled toward the door, Gus called out one more time. "Oh, and when they wake up, tell them the truth. Tell them how you all voted to send them into danger. Tell them how easy it was to manipulate you into sacrificing each other for the promise of treasure. Let them know that the real monster on this ship wasn't the human, it was greed." They made it back to the docking bay in record time, fear and adrenaline, or whatever their species equivalent, driving them forward. Their ships were exactly as they'd left them, undamaged and ready to fly. As they loaded their unconscious companions aboard their respective vessels, Zeol couldn't help but look back at the umbilical connecting his ship to the Perseverance. Through the transparency of the docking tube, he could see Gus standing there in Zira's armor, helmet off, watching them leave. The human raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a salute. Despite everything, Zeol found his exoskeleton's hand rising in response. The ships detached one by one, thrusters firing to put distance between themselves and the doomed vessel. Zeol watched through his viewport as they reached minimum safe distance, his small organic eye straining to see the ancient ship one last time. The explosion, when it came, was almost beautiful. The Perseverance didn't detonate violently. Instead, it seemed to collapse in on itself, a controlled implosion that left nothing but scattered atoms and a brief flare of light. In seconds, 3 centuries of human history was reduced to nothing, ensuring no one would ever plunder its secrets. As Zeol set course for Council space, he found himself thinking about the humans' words. They had gone hunting for a Deathworlder, convinced of their moral superiority, ready to kill what they didn't understand. Instead, they'd been the ones hunted, played, and ultimately schooled by a predator who chose mercy over murder. They'd hunted for the Deathworlder on board, never suspecting he was the one leading the search. And in the end, the only reason they survived was because the predator had decided they weren't worth killing. That, more than anything, would haunt Zeol for the rest of his days.